Good evening. As I can recall, this time 3 years ago, Zachariah, the renowned CNN host, asked tough questions to me at the international conference. He said, Professor Zhang, you always say China should not copy the Western political model. Yet, look at Asia. Virtually all the countries in Asia have adopted Western political system. Why not China? I said, actually, my answer is very simple. Because China has performed better than all the other Asian countries combined over the past 3 decades, especially on the issues of the greatest concern to the Chinese people, such as fighting poverty, producing middle class, creating overall prosperity, and the list goes on. Indeed, 4 decades ago, China was as poor as Malawi of Africa in terms of per capita GDP. Now, China is the largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity. China has produced the world's largest middle class. China is now the largest trading nation. Again, the list goes on. So how to explain China's success? You have all kinds of explanations. For instance, cheap labor. But it's not the case. There are many countries which offer cheaper labor than China. Some say FDI, foreign direct investment. Again, many countries have attracted more foreign direct investment than China, especially in per capita terms. Some say the market economy. Again, most countries in the world practice market economy, but so many of them landed in financial disasters rather than financial whatever, economic prosperity. And then, of course, the famous line, China is authoritarian state. Again, by the Western definition, so many countries in the world are authoritarian, but they fail to create what we call miracles. Obviously, China had done something different. If I have to summarize how to explain China's success, 2 words, the China model, then it will evolve certain complications, especially about the political system, about democracy. How to define democracy? In the West, it's very simple. Multi-party system, 1 person, 1 vote, universal suffrage. Yet, Chinese would say, this is at best procedural democracy, not substantial democracy. Then Chinese will say, we have people's democracy, consultative democracy. We have decision-making process, whatever, democratic centralism. The West will say, no, this is not democracy. So we disagree on this very subject. But for the sake of our discussion today, let me borrow the famous phrase from Abraham Lincoln, the greatest American president by many, government of the people, by the people, for the people. Let's, for the moment, use this as a working definition for the sake of discussion. Then we compare, item by item, for the people, of people, by people. Say, the Chinese side, or the Western side, or the United States has done better. So let's look at first this for the people. And I have found some interesting statistics. The first is, of course, the one I use very often, net household assets at median level. If you look at this United States figure, it's declining all the time. And by the year 2010, China's gap with the United States was already very close, $10,000. And this $77,300 as the median level in China's developed region, which has a population of the United States, 300 million, is closer to poverty line. So this enormous change of China's fate, especially vis-à-vis the fate of the United States. And they can look at another figure. To what degree you feel that your country is on the right track? If we look at this study by Ipsos, which is one of the largest opinion survey companies, in the case of China, 90% think the country is on the right track. In the case of the United States, 37%. In the case of France, 12%. Yeah. Then, of course, for the young generation, do you feel that you can live better than your parents? Again, for the Chinese, 82%, yes. For the Americans, 33%. For France, for the French, I'm sorry, 9%. Yeah, we cannot help it. You know. So, in other words, at least we can see apparently, with regard to for the people, the China model has done better. Now, concerning of the people, if you look at the composition of China's public civil servants, 93% of Chinese civil servants come from ordinary families, ordinary backgrounds. Compared with the United States, let me quote from Stiglitz. United States now, of the 1%, by 1%, for the 1%. Yeah. Actually, it's not far from the truth. Yeah. Now, the most controversial issue is actually by the people. How to rule the country by the people. For the West, the solution is very simple. As I mentioned just now, one person, one vote, universal suffrage, multi-party system. That became synonym with rule by the people. Of course, now we know, wherever you go in the West, this problem of what we called, or they called, elect and regret. You look at the approval rating for the US Congress, it's less than 15%. Could you call this a democracy or rule by the people? It's a joke. No. So, if the West focus on procedures, the Chinese focus on more on substance, or the substance of democracy, which to my mind is good governance. In other words, we can even extrapolate from this. We should really usher in a paradigm shift from the so-called democracy versus autocracy to good governance versus bad governance. That will be able to explain much better the existing world today and the world in the future. Under this kind of guidance, China has conducted gigantic and extensive experiments. For instance, in the political domain, we have tried what I called selection plus election. As I said on many occasions, for top leadership, be a member of this top leadership, usually you're required to work at least twice as the number one of province, which literally means you have governed over 100 million people before you could come to this top leadership level. So this is obviously a better system. Selection plus election is better than simply relying on election. You can look at this issue of what I call the decision-making process. China practices what you may call new democratic centralism. The example is 5-year plan. For every 5 years, we produce a 5-year plan. And in many ways, the success of China is a result of this 5-year planning. But this is a great innovation from the Soviet 5-year planning. It involves actually hundreds, if not thousands of rounds of discussions, consultations at all levels, from bottom up, from up down. So this is an amazing process which leads to better quality of decision making. I remember one friend of mine who is from the United States, and he said, Xi Jinping embraces the year 2050. Well, Donald Trump embraced the year 1950. Yeah. We can plan for next decades, plan for next generation. And this proved to be extremely good for the really fate of China. And behind this, I always argue China's civilizational state, which means China is a country, a result of hundreds of states amalgamated into one over its long history. And this also means for so many thousands of years, China had been ruled under a kind of one-party system, you may call this, unified ruling entity. In many ways, the Communist Party of China has continued this tradition and has it further extended and developed. So that explains a lot why the CCP is a unique institution in China. I want to really summarize the China model in brief. In the political domain, as I mentioned just now, it's selection plus election. is obviously better than simply relying on election. In the economic domain, it's a mixed economy. The state and the market, the state sector and private sector, their roles are, on the whole, more or less well mixed. This is better than neoliberalism, Washington consensus. In the social domain, it is about positive interactions between the state and society, which allows Chinese society to be, on the one hand, extremely dynamic, creative, on the other hand, coherent. So this is crucial. Now I will discuss briefly with you China today and China tomorrow. And I think China is now the largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity. If in nominal US dollar terms, I think China will become the largest economy in 5 to 10 years. China's middle class, from my own estimate, will be twice larger than the US population. The US population is roughly 300 million. 10 years from now, China will have a middle class, perhaps over 600 million people. China has already practiced medical insurance for all and pension for all, although there are levels of differences from region to region. Yet, I think, arguably, China has already done better than the United States. China also developed the world's largest home ownership system, much larger than all Western countries, which is important. China is also now the leader in the world in the renewable energies, wind energy, solar energy, electric cars, etc.
Conventional wisdom says that too much of America's foreign investment is going to China. This leads to job loss. It leads to loss of competitiveness. It's not good for the American economy. So the question is, what percent of America's foreign investment goes to China? How large is large? Now, to give you a hint, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, next door, they invest 20 to 25% of their foreign investment in China. That is large, okay? So how much of America's foreign investment goes to China on average over the last 10 years? The answer is 1%. Practically nothing. For China, the labor force in sheer absolute numbers has been shrinking for 3 or 4 or 5 years. It has no choice in the future except to become more innovative and to become more automated. The numbers of people who are employed in manufacturing in China has been declining for 5 or 6, 7 years. And the interesting thing is the numbers of people who are employed in manufacturing in the US has been increasing for 5 to 6 years. But conventional wisdom would suggest the opposite, that we're losing industrial jobs in China. Actually, the reverse is happening. And the reverse is happening for a very peculiar kind of a reason. China has now gotten to the income level where services are starting to take off. So the manufacturing sector is starting to shrink. The services sector is growing very rapidly. So for the foreseeable future, manufacturing is going to decline. And what they have in manufacturing is going to have to be heavily automated because they basically don't have the labor force for it anymore. Deng Xiaoping is seen as the person who triggered the economic opening up in China. In my book, I call him the unbalanced reformer. It's a very strange term. What do I mean by unbalanced? Deng Xiaoping in around 1980 basically said, we've had decades of communist socialist development. We're very evenly developed. We spread our industries, our people everywhere. We spread our poverty everywhere. We're very poor, but we have equality. So he deliberately unbalanced the country in the sense of saying, I'm going to concentrate all my incentives, my resources along the coast. I'm going to open up China to the external market. I'm going to promote trade. So he channeled practically 70% of the government budget to 3 or 4 provinces, essentially ignoring the other 25. This is very unbalanced. This created a highly competitive, specialized economy geared to the external market. So this was geographically unbalanced. It also led to what I would call economic imbalances. Investment shares of the economy soared. The consumption share of the economy fell, China grew extraordinarily rapidly. Now, this was very good for China because the so-called unbalanced growth geographically, unbalanced growth economically, has led to wage increases of 12% a year compounded for 20 years. We in the United States are quite happy if our wages go up by 2 to 3% for a couple of years. But think about it being compounded for 20 years. So it didn't penalize the average Chinese. Their incomes and their welfares have soared. It also made China incredibly productive. So what I say in my book is, in the West or in other economists, they tend to view imbalances as somehow bad. And I basically write it's actually the key to China's success. China's big cities are actually too small. They need more people, but they need to be able to live in the center, because globally that's what big cities do, like a New York or whatever, or London or Tokyo. And in fact, a key characteristic of China's big cities is that they're less dense than big cities elsewhere globally. And China's small cities are actually more dense than small cities elsewhere. It's the complete opposite of what a normal kind of urban development would give you. Why is it corruption in China has directly made or allowed China to grow more rapidly than normal? Why is it that the richer it gets, the more corrupt it gets? It directly contravenes these two principles. Nevertheless, the general conventional wisdom, as it applies to other countries, is correct. So what is it about China that makes it different from an India or Indonesia or Egypt, okay, or Argentina or Ukraine? And the answer in my book is, this is a mixed economy. The state controls the ownership of all key resources, but the private sector is able to generate higher returns if it could use these resources. So when Deng Xiaoping faced this problem, the problem that the state controlled everything, and this is a socialist state, and you can't privatize it, that would go against the ideology. But he realized that to get better returns, he needed to get it into the hands of private entrepreneurs, but politically, you couldn't privatize these assets. So corruption is the means by which these resources, the use of these resources, are transferred from the state ownership to be used by the private sector. And then the question is, what about the government officials in the party? Are they supportive of this? And the answer is yes, because when they transfer it over for use, they share in the benefits. And the faster the country grows, the more you have to share. Now that's different from other countries. If you're in India, these resources are already in the private sector. The private sector wants to do something. What it needs is the permission of a government official or somebody, okay? And so what is the incentive for the government official? The incentive for the government official is, gee, how do I make some money out of this? Well, I need a bribe, but I hold something back, and the more I hold it back, the more he'll pay me. So basically, I will get a bribe by stopping something. That's corruption impedes growth. In China, the official is motivated to share in the transfer and to encourage greater production, and you're better off. This is truly unique to China. But this is also a problem because Xi Jinping, as you said, wants to curb corruption. Why does he want to curb corruption? Because corruption carried to such an extreme becomes unsustainable, morally unacceptable. Inequality is created. So he's clamping down on this. But there's a problem. If it's been a primary force for driving faster growth, and if you curb this, what do you substitute that with? And this goes back to your point. There are implications for political liberalization, the rule of law, the nature of institutions in China, which have not yet been grappled with. So this is in my book highlighted as a major, big issue that needs to be dealt with in the coming years.